Sometimes, brilliance does not emerge from gleaming laboratories or polished libraries. It rises out of silence, from the echo of a janitor's footsteps, from hands sticky with syrup, from nights when no one is watching. And when a door opens just a crack at 2 in the morning, destiny itself may flood through in the shape of chalk dust. Kai Rivera was 24, a dropout from Massachusetts, working the graveyard shift, refilling water coolers across Harvard's old halls. He had the lean figure of someone who had worked too many jobs too soon, wearing a thin jacket that could not keep out the September chill. His sneakers were worn smooth at the soles. Every night he pushed a heavy cart down the echoing corridors, exchanging empty bottles for full ones, sweeping floors, making sure the academic machine kept humming while others slept. That night, the wind rattled the old windows, and the halls felt like a cathedral emptied of worshippers. The wheels of Kai's cart squeaked faintly, careful not to disturb the fragile dreams behind closed dorm doors. He glanced at his phone. The screen glowed, 2:03 a.m. He stopped. Ahead of him stood room 416. Its door had not shut all the way. A pale strip of light spilled into the hallway. Something in that thin glow tugged at him. He pushed the door just enough to peek inside. The room was empty, but the board along the far wall glowed with chalk marks left alive under the lamp. Lines and symbols twisted like rivers and bridges. Not high school math. Not a simple calculus exercise. These were networks, flows, paths waiting to be minimized or maximized. Kai's chest tightened. It had been years, yet the sight rushed him back to cold mornings with his mother. She had driven an old delivery van, rattling through back streets of Worcester. They had to plan. Which store first? Which route would waste less fuel? Which turn might save 5 minutes so bread and milk reached the counter still warm? A wrong choice meant a shopkeeper frowning, a customer lost. As a boy, Kai had drawn circles on scraps of receipts, marking each store. He connected them with crude lines. He did not know the words graph theory. He only called it our map. But it was the only game that kept hunger from feeling heavier. Now here before him stood the same puzzle, grown vast and formal on a Harvard board. The nodes were labeled A, D, F. Equations, looped and collided. Something in him whispered, "Don't close that path too soon. Let the flow move through D, then invert priority at F." His hand trembled. Without thinking, he reached for a piece of chalk. His fingers were still sticky from a bottle of flavored water he had replaced minutes earlier. The chalk felt alive in his grip. 3 strokes. That was all. He adjusted a variable here, extended a line there. He was not solving, not finishing. He was simply opening the path that had been shut. Then he stepped back. The board looked calmer now, straighter, as if the tangle had been given a breath. Kai knew he should erase it, walk away. But silence has a way of pressing truth out of you. He pulled a crumpled napkin from his pocket, smoothed it on the desk, and with hurried scrawl wrote, "Do not lock the node too early. Let the cost run through D, then switch at F." K. He placed the napkin beneath the chalk tray, set the chalk down, and closed the door gently as if it had never been touched. But inside him, another door had opened, wide and unignorable. He rolled the cart onward. The corridor stretched long and lonely. The overhead lights buzzed with weary hum. Each step echoed louder than it should. Kai's thoughts burned hotter than the wheel's squeaks. He told himself it was foolish. This was Harvard. These symbols belonged to men and women with credentials, papers, degrees hanging in golden frames. He was just the water boy. If anyone discovered what he had done, at best they would laugh. At worst, he would lose his job. And this job, humble as it was his last barrier against the street. But beneath the fear, a warmth stirred. He had not felt it in years, not since the accident. When he was 19, his mother had died in a car crash. The woman who had driven him across endless deliveries, who had carried boxes twice her weight, who had trusted him to trace maps on scraps of paper, gone in a blink. After the funeral, his world collapsed. College dreams withered. He drifted through kitchens, bus stations, night shifts. Knowledge had become a ghost he could not look in the eye. Yet tonight, one board covered in chalk had called his ghost back. For a breath of time, Kai had been alive in that old way again. He pushed the cart harder, as if speed could shake the thought off. But the chalk lines followed him, glowing behind his eyelids. When his shift ended near dawn, he returned the cart to the supply room. He sat on a broken chair, pulled out a stale sandwich, and chewed without tasting. His mind was still inside room 416. He dug a notebook from his backpack, a small one with bent corners. He drew the diagram he had altered, circles and arrows, notes in his cramped handwriting. He feared his memory might betray him. When he finished, he folded the notebook shut and pressed it to his chest. He whispered to himself, almost a prayer. Maybe I just opened the wrong door. But maybe it was the right one. Outside, the first light of morning crept across the red roofs of Harvard. Dust floated in the pale glow. The city woke, and from a single streak of chalk, a story had begun. One that would not end with water bottles or night shifts. The day passed in fragments of exhaustion. By sunrise, though, Kai had trudged back to his small rented room, a converted attic above a mechanic's shop where the hum of compressors never stopped. He dropped onto the mattress without sheets, clutching his notebook as if it were the last piece of himself he trusted. Sleep came shallow, haunted by chalk lines rearranging themselves in the dark. By the time he woke, the light outside had already thinned into late afternoon. His phone buzzed against the floorboards, another reminder from the staffing company. Shift starts at 10. Don't be late. Don't make waves. Their warnings were never subtle. Kai sighed, pulled on the same jacket, and walked toward the campus loading dock. His body moved on habit, but his mind was still in that classroom. Room 416, the board, the napkin. Had someone already erased it? Had someone read it? Or worse, laughed at it? He tried to push the thought aside. A man like him had no business wondering about Harvard's chalkboards. He stacked water bottles, sorted delivery slips, nodded to a foreman who barely looked at him. But the questions gnawed at the edges of his silence. At 4:12 a.m. that morning, after Kai had left, Dean Everett Denham had returned to room 416. A man in his 60s, Denham was known on campus as methodical, precise, a scholar who never raised his voice yet commanded every room. He had expected to find the board in the chaos he had left it. Instead, he stopped cold. The lines had shifted. Variables had been tilted into balance, and there, at the bottom, lay a napkin with hurried words. Denham bent close, reading, "Do not lock the node too early. Let the cost run through D, then switch at F. K." For a long moment he stood in silence, staring at the clarity of thought that had straightened what 3 graduate students had tangled. His pulse quickened. He slipped the napkin into his pocket and whispered, almost to himself, "Who are you?" Kai, of course, knew none of this. At 7 in the evening, as he stacked crates near the dock, his phone buzzed again. Not a reminder this time, but a number he didn't know. He hesitated. Unknown numbers rarely brought good news. He answered. A calm, measured voice came through. "Mr. Rivera? 7 o'clock sharp. Room 416. And don't bring the cart." The line clicked dead. Kai froze. His first thought, this is it. They found out. I'm fired. He looked around at the dock. Men in reflective vests carried boxes past him, indifferent. The foreman barked orders. The world carried on. But inside, Kai felt the air thin. He had no allies here. The staffing company had already warned him, "You're here to move water, not to meddle. If we get complaints, you're done." And now, an invitation. Or was it a summons? Into the very room where he had crossed the line. He stared at his hands, still raw from lifting crates. If I go, I could lose my only job. If I don't go, I'll never know what that note meant to them. What if it actually mattered? The clock dragged towards 7. Every step Kai took across campus felt heavier. Students passed by in clusters, laughing, arms heavy with books. None noticed him. To them, he was invisible, the man who rolled water down their halls. But when he reached the 4th floor, his breath caught. The same door, 416, stood waiting. Light spilled through again, softer this time. He knocked once. "Come in," a voice answered. Inside, Dean Everett Denham sat at a small round table, not behind a lectern, not at the board. A teapot steamed gently beside him, as if this were an invitation to conversation, not interrogation. Kai remained in the doorway, torn between stepping forward and fleeing. Denham gestured calmly. "Sit. You look tired. Tea?" Kai sat stiffly, hands on his knees, unsure if he should even touch the porcelain cup placed before him. The dean reached into his coat pocket, withdrew the napkin, and set it on the table between them. The crumpled paper lay there like a confession. "This," Denham said softly, "was not written by one of my graduate students, nor by me. You left it, didn't you?" Kai's throat tightened. He wanted to lie, to deny, to protect what little he had. But something about the man's gaze, steady, kind, curious, pressed truth out of him. "Yes," he whispered. Denham leaned back. "You know what you wrote?" Kai nodded. "It was obvious. The flow was being cut too early. If you let it run through D, you could redistribute costs cleaner. Like planning routes for—" He stopped himself. "Like planning delivery routes?" Denham finished. Kai blinked. How could he know? The dean smiled faintly. "That is exactly how I first learned to love optimization. My father ran a milk route. Different era, same problem." For a moment, silence filled the room. Not awkward, but human, shared. Then Denham's tone grew serious. "Mr. Rivera, I searched your records. No transcripts, no GED, no college enrollment. You are, on paper, nobody." Kai swallowed hard. Shame burned in his chest. "But I know what I saw on that board," Denham continued. "You don't need grades to prove your mind. You only need a chance." From a folder beside him, the dean drew out a packet. He slid it across the table. "Harvard Extension offers entrance exams next month. If you pass, I will sponsor your tuition and fees. Not charity, investment. But you must sit the exam." Kai stared at the papers. Pages blurred before his tired eyes. "It won't be easy," Denham added. "You'll face not only problems in mathematics, but questions about yourself. And the test is not just for your mind. It is for your future." Kai sat motionless. The tea cooled between them. He thought of the attic room, the endless shifts, the gnawing hunger of wasted years. He thought of his mother, her laughter over a steering wheel, her trust in him to choose the next turn. Finally, he looked up. His voice was quiet, but steady. "I'll take it." Denham nodded once. "Good. Then your time begins now. 31 days. When Kai left room 416, the campus night air struck him sharper than before. He clutched the folder against his chest. He did not know if he could survive the coming month. He only knew he could not walk away. Behind him, the light of room 416 faded as the door shut. Ahead lay the longest 31 days of his life. And so, what began with a napkin note would now test not only his intellect, but the whole of his destiny. The teapot had long gone cold, but Kai still remembered the way the steam curled above it that night. Not because of the tea itself, he had barely sipped, but because of the weight of the folder resting on the table. When he finally walked out of room 416, he carried that folder under his arm as if it were breakable glass. The campus lamps lit the paths in soft pools of yellow. Students hurried past him with laughter, notebooks, plans for morning lectures. To them, it was another Tuesday evening. To Kai, the night had bent the shape of his life. Back in his small attic room, he opened the folder under the single desk lamp. Inside, forms for Harvard Extension, a syllabus outline, exam requirements. He traced the seal with his finger, half in awe, half in dread. 31 days. The papers smelled faintly of chalk and old wood. For Kai, they carried a weight far heavier than paper should. This was not just an exam. It was a line between being forgotten and being seen. The next night, when his shift ended, Kai returned to room 416. Denham was waiting, still in his simple gray coat, as if he had been carved from the building itself. "You read the folder?" the dean asked. Kai nodded. His throat was dry. "Then you know the terms," Denham continued. "No guarantees. Pass, and you may begin a journey. Fail, and you return to the cart." "I understand." Denham studied him. "You will need resources. Texts, a calculator, practice problems. Use what you can find. But I cannot walk the path for you." Kai lowered his eyes. "I don't have money for books." Denham's gaze did not waver. "Then you improvise. Intelligence is not luxury. It is adaptation. You've done it before, haven't you?" Memories rose unbidden. Kai drawing maps on scraps of receipts in the van, using pencils worn to stubs. He nodded slowly. The dean poured 2 cups of fresh tea, darker this time. "This exam will not only measure computation. It will measure your discipline. Every moment will count." Kai wrapped his hands around the cup, letting the warmth soak into his fingers. For a rare instant, he felt not judged, but invited. Afterward, alone in the attic, he laid out his battle plan. He scavenged for used books at a second-hand shop, trading a few crumpled bills he had saved. He found an old TI-84 calculator at a pawn shop, scratched but working. At the cafe down the block, he offered to mop floors after closing in exchange for a few hours of Wi-Fi. He downloaded lectures from MIT's OpenCourseWare, printing notes on cheap paper. He wrote on the first page of his notebook, "These are models I was never supposed to see." By day, he buried himself in practice problems. By night, he hauled water through Harvard's halls, his mind replaying equations as his hands pushed the cart. One evening, exhaustion pressed him to the edge. He had been awake for nearly 30 hours, his room dim, the bulb flickering, bills piled near the mattress. His landlord threatened eviction if rent came late again. He pressed his hands against his eyes. The numbers swam. "What am I doing?" he thought. "I am no student. I am a delivery boy playing with chalk." But then another memory surfaced, his mother's voice, warm despite the cold mornings. "Even the longest route, mijo, is only a series of short turns, one at a time." Kai lifted his pencil again, one problem at a time. Days blurred. He scribbled notes late into the night, sheets of scrap paper piling on the floor like snowdrifts. He traced systems of equations with dull graphite, whispering steps aloud to anchor them in memory. Sometimes he fell asleep at the desk, forehead pressed into pages. He would wake with formulas imprinted on his skin like secret tattoos. The world outside continued without him. Students laughing in courtyards, professors hurrying to lectures, trucks unloading goods at the dock. Kai existed in the margins, unseen. Yet inside his small attic, something was burning alive. 1 week before the exam, Denham called him back into room 416. The board was cleared this time. Only a single phrase was written at the center. "What is the cost of time?" Denham turned. "Answer me, Mr. Rivera." Kai frowned. "In numbers? In meaning?" He swallowed. He thought of hours lost to night shifts, days spent in grief, years wasted after his mother's death. "The cost of time," he said quietly, "is the life you cannot live again. It is every turn you cannot take back, which is why every path must be chosen carefully." Denham studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Good. You are ready." When Kai left that night, he walked slower, as if the ground itself might collapse under him. The exam was no longer just a test. It was a mirror. If he passed, doors would open. If he failed, the chalk would vanish, and with it, his last chance. The campus bells tolled midnight. Kai pressed the folder closer to his chest, whispering to the silent halls, "I won't waste this time." The calendar on Kai's wall looked like a battlefield. 31 squares, each one circled in pencil. Every morning he crossed out another, the lines shaky from fatigue. Each X marked not victory, but survival. By day, Kai fought with textbooks, secondhand, stained, sometimes missing pages. By night, he hauled water bottles through Harvard's endless halls. His body belonged to labor. His mind belonged to equations. It was a cruel division. The world demanded both halves, yet neither was satisfied. In the mornings, he hunched over a thrift store desk lamp that buzzed faintly, its light barely covering the notebook pages. He worked through differential equations line by line, whispering each step so it would stay in his memory. Di/dx equals key. He paused, muttering, "The rate of change grows with itself, like debt. The longer you leave it, the faster it crushes you." For him, mathematics was never abstract. Every symbol had lived in his life. Graph theory was the back roads he had drawn for his mother's deliveries. Differential equations were the way unpaid bills multiplied while he scrambled to keep up. Optimization was survival itself, stretching every dollar, every minute, every step on tired legs. But nights were unforgiving. His shift began at 10. The cart rattled across tiles. His shoulders ached. He moved quietly past the rooms of students younger than him, students who lived the life he had once dreamed of. Sometimes, as he rolled the cart past lecture halls, he glimpsed chalkboards half erased. The equations called out to him, like distant music he was forbidden to hear. He longed to stop, to solve, to belong. Instead, he kept walking, unseen. The days grew harsher. By the second week, his landlord posted a warning on the attic door. Rent overdue. 2 days. Or eviction. Kai counted the crumpled bills in his wallet. Not enough. So after his Harvard shift, he dragged himself to a corner cafe. At closing, when chairs were stacked and lights dimmed, he offered to mop floors in exchange for Wi-Fi. The owner, a kind woman with tired eyes, agreed. For 3 hours each dawn, Kai sat in the glow of a laptop borrowed from a cousin, streaming open lectures from MIT. His eyes stung from sleeplessness, but he scribbled notes until the cafe lights finally went dark. He walked home beneath the paling sky, the city already waking, his body collapsing into a few hours of shallow rest before it began again. One night, after 40 straight hours without real sleep, Kai broke. His head sank onto his open notebook, cheek pressed against numbers blurred with graphite. His hand still clutched the pencil, but the will had drained away. He whispered to the empty room, "I can't. I don't belong here. This isn't mine." He thought of quitting, of returning the folder to Denham and saying thank you, but no. He imagined disappearing into the faceless world of night labor, safe in its invisibility. But then, through the fog of despair, memory returned. His mother's voice. "Mijo, the road always feels longest at the halfway mark. Keep driving. The next turn will come." He lifted his head. His reflection stared back from the dark window pane. Hollow eyes, unshaven jaw, but still alive. He picked up the pencil again. Another problem. Another step. By the third week, his notes covered the attic floor. Sheets upon sheets, taped together like a growing map. Equations wound into pathways. Proofs tangled like streets. In the center, he pinned one phrase. Every problem is only a series of smaller turns. He studied until dawn, fueled by vending machine coffee and the stubborn pulse of hope. At times, his heart ached for what he had lost, for the college years that had slipped away, for the mother who would never see him here. But then he would press his palm to the pages and whisper, "This is for you. Every line, every answer." The final week arrived. Kai circled the last 7 squares on his calendar in red. The pressure was crushing now. He memorized formulas until they seeped into dreams. Eigenvalues, Lagrangian multipliers, nonlinear systems, words that once belonged to distant classrooms now lived in his bloodstream. But fear was his constant companion. Each day it whispered, "You will fail. You will embarrass yourself. You will prove them right." To silence it, Kai returned to his mother's lessons. Each night before sleep, he closed his eyes and pictured the van's steering wheel. He pictured the maps drawn on receipts. He whispered to himself, "Choose the next turn. Nothing more." The night before the exam, Kai stood at his small window, looking out at the city. The lights of Harvard glowed in the distance, unreachable yet near. He clutched his notebook, heavy with weeks of scribbles. "I have nothing," he whispered. "But maybe nothing is enough." Then he closed the notebook, lay down on the thin mattress, and let himself rest. For tomorrow would demand all of him, body, mind, and the last fragments of his heart. The morning arrived sharp and cold. Sunlight spilled between the red brick of Harvard Yard, catching on frost that had settled overnight. Kai Rivera walked slowly across the cobblestones, a pencil in one hand, his battered notebook in the other. He wore a second-hand shirt, pressed as neatly as he could manage, and the jacket that no longer closed at the middle. His stomach churned. He had not eaten breakfast. Nerves had stolen his appetite. Yet as he approached the examination hall, he carried himself with the quiet of someone who had already given everything he had to give. Inside, the room was hushed. Desks stood in rows, papers stacked neatly at each seat. A proctor with kind eyes checked Kai's name from the list, though there was no diploma beside it, no transcript to anchor his place. "Only pencil and paper," she reminded the students. Kai nodded, clutching his pencil like a lifeline. He took a seat near the back. Around him, younger faces bent over calculators, rulers, clean notebooks. He had only scraps of sleep and 31 days of furious study to carry him through. The clock struck 8. The exam began. Problem 1. Kai read the question. A network of 3 nodes distributes resources from a central hub. Determine the optimal flow minimizing total cost given time constraints. He exhaled. 3 nodes. To others, it was math. To him, it was memory. His mother's delivery van, the map of receipts, the early morning turns. He drew the diagram, his pencil steady. He traced routes, balanced weights. Within minutes, the problem unraveled into sense. He wrote with clarity, as if he were simply retelling an old story. Problem 4. His pencil hovered. The question spread across the page like a wall. Non-linear constraints, a system refusing to align. Around him, students pressed calculators, frowning. Kai closed his eyes. For 10 long minutes, he did not write. He breathed. He let the silence settle. And then, the memory. That night in room 416, the chalk in his sticky fingers, the whisper inside, "Don't lock the node too early. Let it run through D, then invert at F." He opened his eyes, heart steady now. He set his pencil down on paper and began. Stroke by stroke, he traced the same logic he had once left on a napkin. The wall cracked. The problem unfolded. Hours passed. His hand cramped, but he kept moving. Each question demanded more than memory. It demanded faith that his mind belonged here. Finally, the last section. An essay. The prompt: describe an application of optimization from your own life experience. Kai stared at the blank page. Around him, pens scratched, students conjuring examples from textbooks. But for Kai, there was only one story. He began to write. He wrote of dawn deliveries, of a mother driving through snow with her son tracing maps in the dark. He wrote of hunger kept at bay by careful routes, of how a few minutes saved meant a breakfast still warm for families with little to spare. He wrote not of equations alone, but of why they mattered, because behind every calculation was a human need, a chance to make life gentler for someone waiting at the end of the road. When he finished, his hands trembled. Not from fear this time, but from release. The page before him was not an exam answer. It was his life set down in words. The proctor called time. Papers were collected. Chairs scraped against the floor as students filed out. Kai walked slowly, the morning sun blinding as he stepped outside. For the first time in weeks, he carried nothing. No folder, no notes, no napkins with hurried scribbles. Only the weight of what he had left on those pages. He did not know if it was enough. He did not know if the examiners would see what he had poured out. But he knew one thing with certainty: he had not hidden. He had not pretended. For once he had stood in the open light, pencil in hand, truth on paper. He sat on a bench outside the hall, closing his eyes against the sun. For years he had lived half invisible, a man pushing a cart while brilliance slipped past. Today, for the first time, he had faced the world without disguise. Perhaps he would pass. Perhaps he would fail. But either way, he thought, he would never again be just the boy in the shadows. The waiting was worse than the exam. For 2 weeks, Kai Rivera lived between fear and hope. Each day he dragged his cart through the halls of Harvard, the familiar squeak of wheels echoing against stone. Each night he returned to his attic, staring at the folder that had started it all. He tried to study, but his mind circled the same questions. Did I pass? Did they see me or only my mistakes? He told no one. To speak of it would make the risk real, so he carried his silence like another shift on his shoulders. On a gray morning, his phone vibrated against the desk. An email notification glowed across the cracked screen. Harvard Extension, exam results. His heart thundered. His hands shook so badly he nearly dropped the phone. He opened the message. "Congratulations, you scored in the top 2%. Scholarship awarded." Kai sank onto the mattress, breath rushing out of him. He read the words again and again, as though they might vanish. Top 2%. scholarship. The attic seemed to brighten, though the bulb flickered as always. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to smile without restraint. Days later, he dressed in his best shirt, second-hand, slightly too large, and walked across Harvard Yard as a student, not a custodian. The difference was invisible to others, yet monumental to him. His backpack, stuffed with used books, felt like armor. He entered his first class, Applied Nonlinear Systems, taught by Professor Rowan Miles. Students whispered about Miles before he arrived. They called him the GPA killer, a man who believed education was a forge and students were the metal to be hammered. His reputation was legend: sharp questions, merciless deadlines, no tolerance for weakness. When he strode into the room, the air itself seemed to stiffen. Tall, angular, his glasses flashing under the fluorescent lights, Miles carried a stack of papers as if they were weapons. "Mathematics," he began, "does not care for excuses. It does not wait for your comfort. If you cannot endure rigor, you should leave now." No one moved. Miles wrote a system of equations across the board, chalk striking like flint. Variables twisting through non-linear constraints, impossible at first glance. "This," he said, "is your midterm problem. Due Friday. No collaboration. No partial credit. Solve it or fail." The class erupted in uneasy whispers. A tall student near the front, Grant Pritchard, known for his sharp tongue and sharper suits, raised his hand. "Professor, that's not solvable. Everyone knows it." Miles turned, his gaze piercing. "Then perhaps everyone is wrong." Kai sat in silence, his pencil hovering over the page. The room buzzed with doubt, but in his mind, the lines on the board were not impossible. They bent, faintly, toward a solution. He could not yet see the path, but he felt it waiting, like a faint road hidden under snow. That night, Kai returned to the attic with the problem copied onto 3 pages. He spread them across the floor, surrounded by piles of scrap notes. He whispered to himself, "Not impossible, only hidden." He worked until his pencil dulled to wood. He traced variables, shifted assumptions, flipped the system on its head. At dawn, he had not solved it, but he knew one thing: he would not surrender. The week pressed on. In class, Miles prowled the rows like a hawk. Grant smirked, whispering loudly that the problem was a trap to weed out the weak. Other students avoided eye contact. But Kai worked silently, each night erasing and rewriting until the paper tore. He remembered his mother's words: "Even the longest road is only short turns. Keep driving." By Thursday, exhaustion carved lines into his face. His notes lay in mountains around him, chalk dust from borrowed blackboards clinging to his sleeves. And then, at last, in the quiet of dawn, something gave way. He saw it, not as an equation, but as a delivery route once more. If he redirected the constraints through an unexpected variable, the system balanced. It was like opening a jammed door with a gentler hand. Kai laughed softly, the sound startling in the silent room. He had found the path. On Friday, he placed a 3-page solution on Miles's desk. No flourish, no pride, only quiet certainty. That evening, the department hosted a colloquium at Lowell Hall. Students filled the seats. Professors lined the front row. Kai slipped into the back, content to watch. But when the slides began, his chest tightened. Across the screen glowed the words, "Rivera Variation." Beneath it, in smaller print, co-author, K. Rivera. Murmurs rippled through the room. Miles stood at the podium, gaze sweeping over the audience. Then, without warning, he held out the clicker toward Kai. "5 slides are yours," he said. The room turned. Faces stared. Kai's hands trembled as he walked forward, each step echoing in his ears. At the podium, he cleared his throat. Instead of launching into technical jargon, he spoke as he knew best, through story. He described a van rattling down back streets, a boy drawing maps on receipts, how each turn was a decision in disguise. Slowly, he wove the real mathematics into the memory, showing how optimization was not abstract but lived. The hall grew still. Heads nodded. A professor from Caltech raised a sharp question, but Kai answered with steady voice, his logic clear. The silence that followed felt like respect. When he finished, he handed the clicker back to Miles. The professor gave a single nod, not praise but recognition. For the first time, Kai's name lived not in shadows, but on a slide, in the record of Harvard itself. Lowell Hall glowed with lamplight that evening, its tall windows shimmering against the autumn dark. Students hurried in, their voices blending with the shuffle of programs and the scrape of chairs. Faculty members in neat coats filled the front rows. The air held the weight of expectation, the kind that turns an ordinary night into a memory. Kai Rivera sat near the back at first, notebook balanced on his knees, trying to disappear into the crowd. He was used to invisibility. For years, it had been his armor. But tonight, invisibility was no longer possible. At the podium, Professor Rowan Miles adjusted his glasses, his presence sharp as ever. He spoke with precision, introducing the evening's topic, nonlinear systems, optimization, and a certain problem once deemed unsolvable. Then, with the faintest pause, he pressed a button. The slide on the screen shifted. Across the white glow appeared 3 words in bold: Rivera Variation. And below it, co-author K. Rivera. A ripple moved through the room. Students twisted in their seats, scanning the crowd for the unfamiliar name. Professors whispered to one another. At the back, Kai felt his heart thundering in his chest. He had not expected this. To see his name there in front of all of Harvard, it was almost unbearable. Then Miles did something even more impossible. He turned his gaze to the back of the hall and extended the small black clicker. "Mr. Rivera," he said, "the first 5 slides are yours." The hall fell silent. Kai froze. His legs resisted, but something larger than fear lifted him from the chair. Step by step, he walked forward, his palms damp, knees weak. Students' eyes followed him. A professor coughed, surprised. At the podium, he stood small before the great hall. The lights were warm, the faces endless. For a moment, his mind emptied. Then he remembered the van, the frost on the windshield, his mother's hand on the steering wheel, the maps he had drawn on scraps of receipts. And he began to speak. Not with jargon, not with bravado, but with story. He told them about the delivery routes, about how a few minutes saved could mean warm bread for a waiting family. He described how each turn on the map carried weight, how one wrong choice could ripple into hunger. Then, gently, he layered the mathematics on top. The system of equations was not abstract. It was the skeleton of those same choices. The Rivera variation was simply a way to keep the path open longer, to let the flow breathe before it locked. His voice, though quiet, carried. Students leaned forward. Professors stopped scribbling notes and listened. When he finished his slides, a hand rose from the front row. A visiting professor from Caltech, known for sharp questions, leaned back in his chair. "You assume stability under perturbation," the man said, his voice measured. "But what if the network scales? Your adjustment might collapse under larger load. Have you considered that?" The hall tightened. It was a test, not only of logic, but of legitimacy. Kai steadied himself. He had expected to be dismissed. Instead, he was being engaged. That, in itself, was a kind of victory. He answered carefully, walking through the constraints, showing where the scaling might strain. and where the system could still bend without breaking. He drew, in words, a road widening into highways, yet still guided by the same principle. Do not close the door too soon. When he finished, silence lingered. Then the Caltech professor nodded slowly. "Convincing," he said. Something shifted in the room. Heads turned not in doubt, but in recognition. A murmur spread, softer this time, almost approving. Miles took back the clicker. His expression was unreadable, but his words carried weight. "Thank you, Mr. Rivera." For Kai, that single phrase was heavier than applause. It was acknowledgement. After the session, as people filed out, he stood awkwardly by the wall, unsure whether to leave quickly or linger. A few students glanced his way, curious. One even offered a nod. Dean Everett Denham approached quietly, hands folded behind his back. He did not offer praise, only a small envelope. "For the record," he said, "your name will appear in the minutes of this colloquium. That is permanent." Kai held the envelope, his fingers trembling. Permanent. For years, his existence had left no trace. One job after another. Nothing that remained once he walked away. And now, a mark that would outlive him. Carved into the history of a place he had once only cleaned. That night, back in his attic room, Kai spread the envelope on the desk and lit the small lamp. He reread his name on the printed program until the letters blurred. K. Rivera. Simple, almost plain. Yet it glowed to him like a fire in the dark. He thought of his mother again, of how she used to say, "Leave something better behind, mijo, even if it's just a smile." Now, at last, he had left more than a smile. He had left a proof, a variation, a name. And though storms still waited ahead, he closed his eyes that night with a peace he had not known in years. Recognition brought with it new dangers. Weeks after the colloquium, Kai Rivera began working on a longer paper, expanding his variation into a full exploration of non-linear flows. He poured himself into it, writing late into the night on borrowed laptops, copying diagrams by hand when printers failed. 50 pages grew slowly, each one a bridge built from exhaustion and fragile hope. It was not just mathematics. It was his lifeline, his proof that he belonged. Then one night, returning from his shift, Kai found his draft missing. He had left the stack of papers neatly bound on his desk before leaving for work. Now the desk was bare. The window rattled slightly open, though he never left it that way. Panic clawed through him. He tore through the room, searching beneath the mattress, in drawers, even in the trash. Nothing. At last, in the alley bin behind the building, he saw it. Damp, ripped, pages smeared by coffee grounds. His 50 pages ruined. Kai gathered them in his arms, his hands shaking. He tried to flatten them, to wipe them clean, but the ink bled into unreadable stains. His chest heaved as though he had lost, not paper, but blood. Days later, rumors spread. A paper had been submitted to the department by Grant Pritchard, polished, neat, only 20 pages, but suspiciously familiar. The same problem, the same framework, though stripped of depth and altered enough to disguise. When Kai heard, his stomach turned. Grant, who had mocked the challenge, now stood before professors with a confident smile, presenting a shortened version of Kai's work as his own. The betrayal was not only theft, it was erasure. Kai's nights, his hunger, his fingerprints on every line, swept away beneath another man's name. The department convened a hearing. Faculty sat in rows, solemn. Students gathered in whispers. Kai stood at the front, pale, trembling, with only his ruined pages as evidence. Grant spoke first, voice smooth. "My paper is original. Any resemblance is coincidence. After all, these are common problems in nonlinear systems. Surely no one can claim ownership of a method. The room murmured. Then Dean Everett Denham asked gently, "Mr. Rivera, what do you have to say?" Kai lifted the torn pages. They sagged, waterlogged, fragile. He spoke softly, but each word was steady. "This is my work. Every night for weeks, I wrote these by hand. They may be ruined, but you can still see my handwriting, my notes in the margins, and more than that—" He stopped, breath catching. "More than that, these pages are not just math. They are my life. They came from delivery routes and nights without sleep, from hunger and hope. Ideas are not accidents. They are lived, and this one was lived by me." The silence was heavy. Then Mira, a fellow student and one of the few who had spoken kindly to Kai, rose from the crowd. Her voice cut clear. "Don't let them teach you to stay quiet," she said. "He belongs here, and you know it." The professors exchanged glances. At last, Denham spoke. "Authorship shall be recorded as K. Rivera." The decision was final. Grant was suspended for misconduct. Kai stood stunned. The relief was not triumph, but survival. He had not been erased. That evening he walked into an empty classroom. The board stood waiting, chalk resting in its tray. Slowly, he picked it up and wrote a single sentence. "Ideas survive theft. Integrity survives everything." The words hung pale against the dark board, a promise to himself more than to anyone else. Outside, autumn leaves swirled across the courtyard. Kai watched them tumble in silence. He had won, yes, but the victory left him hollow. It was not the applause of the colloquium, nor the joy of passing the exam. It was a quieter truth, that even in betrayal, even when others tried to steal his voice, he still had one thing they could not take: his honesty. And that, he realized, might be the only true wealth he would ever carry. After the storm of the plagiarism hearing, the halls of Harvard felt different to Kai Rivera. Some eyes followed him now with respect, others with suspicion, but fewer with indifference. His name was no longer invisible. It lived on a record, written in minutes, printed in a program. Still he felt restless, unsure where to place this fragile victory. One night, well past midnight, he returned to room 117 of the old science building. The room was small, the air heavy with chalk dust. On the board, a professor had left half-solved equations, like abandoned thoughts. Kai stood at the threshold, tempted to pass by. But then he remembered Denham's words. "You don't need permission to think." He stepped inside. That evening, he had been reading Professor Evelyn Ross's latest paper, a dense work on regression loops that seemed unsolvable in parts. Her conclusion trailed off, as if she herself had left the problem unfinished. Kai picked up a piece of chalk. Slowly, carefully, he drew the diagram, then turned one node backward, reversing its direction. To him, it was not rebellion, only instinct, like rerouting a van around traffic. Suddenly, the feedback loop balanced. He stepped back, breathing hard. It was not polished, not complete, but it was possible. A voice startled him. "You know," someone said gently, "I had been waiting to see if anyone would try that." He turned. Professor Evelyn Ross herself stood in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling faintly. She was known for her brilliance, but also for her silence in the faculty's political wars. Kai flushed. "I didn't mean to—" Ross raised a hand. "Don't apologize. Saturday morning, I hold a seminar. No slides, no microphones, just chalk and board. We call it the white chalk session. Come." She left before he could answer. Word spread quickly. Students whispered that something unusual was happening in room 117, a place where ideas could breathe without fear of judgment, where even unfinished thoughts were given space. Kai came that Saturday. The room was dim, lit only by tall windows. Students gathered in a circle, each with chalk in hand. Ross welcomed him with a nod, as though he had always belonged. "Here," she said. "We don't lecture. We listen. Not just to answers, but to beginnings." One by one, people walked to the board, scribbling fragments, questions, even mistakes. And instead of laughter, there was silence, listening, considering. Kai's chest tightened. For years he had hidden his ideas, afraid of mockery, of dismissal. Now he was asked not just to solve, but to be heard. When his turn came, his hand shook as he drew. But when he explained the inversion he had tried in Ross's paper, nods circled the room. Questions followed, but not hostile ones. Curious, open. For the first time, Kai felt not like an intruder, but like a voice among voices. Soon, room 117 became something of a legend. Students from different departments wandered in. Some were undergraduates, some graduate students, even a few who had once dropped out returned quietly, finding courage in the listening. Dean Denham visited once, standing silently at the back. As he left, he slipped a card onto the desk where Kai sat. On it was a handwritten note. "Sometimes revolutions sound no louder than chalk against slate." Kai read it again and again, feeling its weight. The board in room 117 filled each week with phrases as much as equations. At one session, someone scrawled, "We don't need permission to be brilliant." The words stayed there for days, smudged but never erased. Students passing by paused, some shaking their heads, some smiling. To Kai, it was more than graffiti. It was truth. For years he had lived waiting for permission, to study, to speak, to belong. Now, in this quiet room, he learned that brilliance required no gatekeeper. It only required courage. One night, walking back from the seminar, Kai paused under the autumn stars. The air smelled of fallen leaves, sharp and sweet. He looked at his hands, still dusted white with chalk. He whispered to himself, "I am not alone anymore." For a man who had lived years in silence, that single sentence was worth more than any grade or accolade. Winter settled heavy on Cambridge, snow piling against stone steps, lamplight glowing soft through frosted glass. Kai Rivera no longer pushed a water cart through Harvard's halls. Instead, he walked with a folder of notes under his arm, not as custodian, but as teacher. One morning, an envelope had arrived. Inside was a single sheet, stamped with the university seal. Appointment, adjunct instructor, subject to term review. At the bottom, in neat script, "We do not care how you entered. We care what you build while you are here." Kai had read those lines again and again, hardly daring to believe. Room 117 was full that night. Word had spread far beyond campus. Students crammed into the chairs, others sat cross-legged on the floor. Some were undergraduates, some graduate students, a few professors, and even faces older than textbooks. Men and women who had left school years ago yet returned now, chasing something they thought they had lost. Kai stood at the board, chalk trembling in his hand. The hum of conversation quieted as he began to write. Not equations at first, but words. If you can solve the problem of your life in silence, leave a mark of chalk for those who come after. He turned. The room hushed, every face lifted toward him. He began not with a lecture, but with a story. He told of a van rattling through dark streets, of a boy sketching maps on crumpled receipts. He told of nights mopping cafe floors to steal Wi-Fi, of notes taped together like patchwork. He told of failing, doubting, nearly quitting, and then of a door left ajar at 2 in the morning where chalk had changed everything. And then, gently, he wove the mathematics into the tale. Flow optimization, non-linear systems, nodes and constraints, but always linked back to life. How every formula was only a mirror of choices we all face. Every theorem a way to honor the cost of time. The students listened in silence. Some leaned forward, eyes bright. Some wiped tears they did not expect. Afterward, a hand rose from the back. It was not a student, but a man in a janitor's uniform, gray hair tucked under a cap. "Mr. Rivera," he asked quietly, "do you really think someone like me could do what you did?" The room stilled. Kai's voice was steady. "I don't think you could. I know you can. Because I was you." The man lowered his head, eyes wet. In that moment, Kai understood. The real work was not equations. It was permission. The kind he had once been waiting for, and now could give. Weeks passed. Room 117 became more than a classroom. It became a refuge, a spark. Students brought friends, neighbors, even children curious to draw. Each left behind some fragment on the board, not always correct, not always complete, but honest. And Kai wrote one rule on the wall in permanent marker. No voice is wasted here. One evening, as snow fell outside, Dean Denham visited quietly. He stood at the back, hands clasped, watching the crowd. When the session ended, he approached Kai. "You've built something, Mr. Rivera," he said softly. "Not just a proof, not just a class, a door." Kai swallowed hard. "A door?" Denham nodded. "Yes, one left open, so the next person need not knock so hard." Years later, when people spoke of Kai Rivera, they remembered not only his theorems or his variation in nonlinear systems. They remembered the small attic room where papers piled like snow. They remembered the chalkboard in 117 covered in words as much as formulas. They remembered the boy who once pushed a cart through Harvard's halls, and the man who turned that silence into a legacy. But on that first night as instructor, Kai remembered only his mother. He pictured her hands on the steering wheel, the van rattling down dark streets. He imagined her voice. "Leave something better behind, mijo." He looked at the chalk dust on his fingers glowing faintly in the lamplight. And he whispered, "I did, Mama. I left a door." The camera of memory pulls back. The chalkboard is filled. Students linger, talking softly. Kai erases the board, but faint traces remain. Whispers of thought that no sponge can fully remove. Dust rises in the golden light, suspended like stars, and as the room empties, a single sentence still glows faint on the slate. We don't need permission to be brilliant. Thank you for walking this journey with Kai Rivera. A story that began with a boy pushing a cart through Harvard's silent halls ended with a door left open. Not for himself alone, but for those who will come after. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that brilliance can rise from the quietest places, then I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe, so you won't miss the next tale of hidden genius, of lives shaped not by privilege but by courage. Every click, every shared moment helps keep these stories alive, not just on the page but in the hearts of those who still wait for their own door to open.